Thank you for the invite, and thank you for the coaches on the call giving up their Friday afternoon to listen to me for half an hour. So I hope that I keep it very short and succinct, and that you can hopefully take a few things away from the chat today. And like was mentioned, it's very informal. I like discussion, I like debate. So if there is any questions as we go along, please use the chat function to do so, or certainly unmute at the end, and I'm happy to take questions, and I'll stay on as long as you want me to stay on. A little bit about myself as a coach. I've been coaching since I was 16. Not want to give my age away too much, but I've been coaching now for around about 19 years, obviously at various different levels, but predominantly based in the female game. I have worked in boys and male football before, but the vast majority of my experience lies within the female game. In relation to some of the jobs that I've held, I've been at Rangers, Glasgow Rangers, twice now. This is my second stint at the club. My current role just now is I'm the Girls Academy manager, as well as the assistant coach to the women's first team. I was head of girls and women's football at Heart of Midlothian, based in Edinburgh in Scotland. And I was also technical director at Manchester City for a couple of years, working within the girls and women's programme there. So I've learned a lot, obviously, through my time as coaches, as you will as well as coaches, as you evolve and develop and different experiences at different clubs. And for me today, obviously, these are not opinions of my employers, but these are certainly opinions that I've taken from myself and experiences that I've learned through my coaching journey. So what I want to talk about today is really how do we best maximise players' potential? How do we focus on the individual to ensure that we get the best out of them, which ultimately will impact on the team overall. So as I say, I'm going to just probably scaffold it a little bit with some background information. What are the kind of theories that underpin some of the things that I'm going to speak about, and then really just give you some practical tools to move forward with. So as mentioned, going to touch just very briefly on the barriers that potentially that we may face, and then give you some practical tools and how that maybe look in action at your clubs. I appreciate that you're all at different stages as well, so potentially you're all working within adult football, some of you might be working in the younger age groups at academies or whatever it may be. And I think for me, yes, some of this might impact on the age and stage, but predominantly you can use this in these tools no matter what level that you're working within. So some of the barriers, and again, you guys might come up with better solutions and ideas than I have, but these are just some things that I've written up here. So why do we maybe not spend as much time with the individuals? Why do we not put that effort and time in? I think a lot of time it can be time on the pitch. It can be time that we have with our players is minimal. It can be limited. So with that then impacts on how much time that we can give to individuals as well. So I think for me, time constraints is a massive factor in that and a massive barrier. Depending on the age and stage that you're working with, it might be that you have a focus on results. It has to be a focus from weekend to weekend to winning games. And therefore that takes precedent, that takes priority, and that has an impact then on you looking more short term rather than looking at long term with that individual in mind. I think another reason might be that improvements can be slow. When you're working with individual players, it's not that easy to see a huge improvement over a short space of time. It can take a long time for that to develop. So again, motivation can be impacted between coach or indeed player. Or it might just be, and again, I understand that some of these might have went through different coaching pathways. In my experience as a coach education was a positive one. There was some elements of individual development within that, but primarily most of my coach education was always really centered around the team or units within a team, and really centered around the kind of technical, tactical aspects, but very little maybe given to the individual player and how we develop them to their fullest. So it might just be that we've got a lack of knowledge or a lack of confidence in relation to how we can actually individualise training and develop those individuals within our team. I just want to put a couple of little kind of theories in your head, and I'm not going to go heavy on this because I'm certainly not an expert in any of this by no stretch of imagination. But I think any good coaches are curious and they want to know more, and they try to join up some of the dots that they see from a practical implication side of things, and then from a theoretical point of view as well. So the first one I wanted to share with you is the Bremer theory. And this, you've probably seen diagrams like this before. It's nothing new. It's an ecological, kind of concept. that there's lots of complex layers that sit in each individual's environment. So if you put the player or the person at the centre of that, often you peel back layer upon layer and you'll have things that impact on them directly, i.e. family, friends, relationships within their coach of the team. Go back a little bit further and you've got school that has an interest in there, or university, or whatever it may be, other interests that impact on that. And then from a wider perspective, you've got the cultural issues that exist, or the culture that's there within their environment, economic issues or barriers that have an influence, societal issues, and obviously where things are at from a political point of view. So all of those things in a mix, and really what I'm trying to get across here in this slide is that coaching individuals and coaching people's complex. It's no simple. Everyone's different. Everyone's got a different journey. Everyone's got a different environment. And I think as coaches, if we can peel those layers one by one over a period of time, then we're then really making inroads in how we can develop that individual better for them to then maximise their potential. So it's not just always what we do on the pitch. I would argue that actually quite often it's what we do off the pitch and how we then connect with the people that we're working with in order to then seek improvement as we then move forward. The next one that I just wanted to throw in there, which is quite a well-used one, and I'm sure a lot of you on the call know this already, but the self-determination theory, where this obviously centres around three key things: the element of competence, autonomy, and relatedness. And again, that's really important when you're trying to devise anything that you want to harness a little bit of motivation and engagement. So if you're looking at trying to develop individuals, we've got to make sure that they're competent and they feel competent enough. We've got to make sure that they have a voice and they have a bit of autonomy. And again, that we'll touch upon that later. And obviously they feel that connection, not just the connection to maybe the football club or the team that they're part of, but a connection to you as the coach, and making sure that you're doing things together, that there's a connection, a sense of belonging. And if you can do all those things, then hopefully motivation and engagement can come from that. And then that player then stays motivated and engaged to then want to learn and do more. And I think, again, that's a win-win for coach and for player. The last one I wanted to throw in there before I give you some practical examples is motivational interviewing, MI for short. This is something that I'm just getting familiar with myself, so I don't know a great deal about it yet. But for me, it's about the skill of coaches and how we can ask questions and how we can be really deliberate in how we ask those questions. I think sometimes we can be quite lazy with our questioning as coaches, and maybe quite often we don't cover enough of this again in coach education, or probably analyse ourselves as coaches and how we actually use effective questioning. And I think, again, if we want to dig a little bit deeper into individuals and get to know them a little bit better, then I think the process at MI is a really interesting one, and something that I would encourage you all to look into a little bit more in detail and see if you can apply that to some of your coaching practice. As I said, I don't know enough about it either to go into any great detail. That's why I'm putting it up there on the slide for you to also look at and be curious about, and then hopefully investigate that in your own time and try that in your coaching practice within your clubs and your environment that you're operating in. Okay, so I'm now going to touch upon some tools, some practical tools that I think are relevant and how we can, in a practical setting, use to help develop our players individually. So I'm just going to go through them one by one. I won't spend maybe more than 2 or 3 minutes on them, so apologies if I go through them quickly, but I wanted to kind of cram as many in as I possibly can. And then if anyone's interested to know a little bit more, then obviously we can ask throughout the session. Again, I'm very aware that some of you will have some of these practices already in place, which is great. Some you might have tried and not worked before, and that's okay as well, if you put that down to experience. But hopefully there'll be 1 or 2 things that you think that resonates and you quite like the idea of. And if that's the case, then I would urge you then just to go and experiment, try it, roll it out. What's the worst that can happen? So we'll go through them one by one. So the first one is individual development plans, a buddy up system, formal feedback, the concept of ghost coaching, the use of video analysis, issuing pre-activity tasks, and the use of using parents as an additional support. So if you look at the first one, this is IDPs. This is something that's probably going to really kind of go back to what we're going to talk about in all the other columns as well. Most clubs will have this in their plans. Most clubs, I think, certainly most academies will have an individual development plan for players. This here that I've put together for you is just a really basic one at this moment in time. For me, how this should work is that individuals, the players themselves, give themselves a rating. So they would go through the 4 pillars. They would give themselves a rating between 1 to 5 or whatever it is you decide to do. What are their main strengths? Where do they see their areas to improve? And how are they then going to apply that into their coaching or into their training that they're doing with you as a coach? They should then help create that themselves, and then as a coach you can then work with them to then meet them in the middle. What are some of the things that they're doing? Are they quite accurate with their feedback? Is there things that you think that you can maybe add to that plan? And maybe using that idea of motivational interviewing, you can maybe draw some of those other key things out as well, which would be quite important. I'm not sure how many of you actually use this already, but I think this is a great tool just to give in relation to a bit of goal setting. It helps then create a real clear focus for the player, and it then makes everyone understand what their goals are. For me, a good IDP plan should probably be reviewed every 12 weeks. I think we can't be too lazy where we do something at the start of the season when we're really motivated and then we forget all about it, and then we just look at it at the end of a season. So for me, these have to be continually analysed and reviewed, and they're live documents. They can change, obviously, and they're fluid within that, depending on where the players are at throughout that period. So again, as I said, it's a very basic concept, but something that I think it helps players goal set. It gives them clear targets that they want to achieve. And it's something then that everyone within the club, whether it be coaches and support staff and their parents, etc., can be aware of. And everyone then can work towards the same goals for that individual, which I think is really crucial. Kind of relating to that, another way of getting individualised attention and developing the individual is giving that appropriate feedback. So like we mentioned, every 3 months, for example, that's maybe when we use that opportunity to have some formal setting and we discuss with the player how they think they're developing within their IDP. What is their plan? Are they on track to make that plan? Do they think they've achieved it? If not, do they need additional support, and what does that look like? I think where possible, us as coaches need to try to learn to listen more rather than speak. So I would always encourage, and I know this will depend on the age and stage of the player, but I'd always encourage that the player tries to lead that session as much as they possibly can, and coaches and parents try to keep their voice to a minimum as best as they can, so we really get an understanding of where the kid thinks that they're at. If you're fortunate enough to have, obviously, other resources within your own club, whether that be sports science, S&C, physios, etc., they too, in my opinion, should also be part of that process, because it may be a player's real focus is a physical aspect. And if that's the case, then that sits better with the S&C coach or the sports scientist. Obviously, if you're in a position where it's just you and someone else, 2 coaches, and that's all you have, then again, as best as you possibly can, coaches then try to support that player to develop whatever aspect or what key pillar that they want to try to improve upon. Like everything, I think it's really key that we co-create. I don't think that the player themselves should have all autonomy. I think that's really important, and it's crucial that they have a say. But I also think the skill of us as coaches is to then try to steer them where we think's best. I think, as I said, it has to be co-created. It can't just be all coach knowledge or player knowledge. It's somewhere in the middle, and it goes back to that element of self-determination theory, where there's an element of autonomy, but there's a sense of belonging and relatedness as well. So it's getting that balance right. And I think if you do that, then you keep the motivation high, and everyone then is on the same page in relation to that person's journey and where they want to go and where they see their goals being. This one's quite interesting. So this is the role of the ghost coach. What I've often found in my experiences is that you'll always have one coach that will lead the session, and other coaches there often as a kind of support mechanism. Often I feel that's a really wasted opportunity for that second coach. So what I've tried to do in other clubs that I've been at and that I've seen work really, really well is that second coach then is really only concerned about the players' IDPs, their targets. So as the other coach is leading the session and the session's going on and they're controlling the overall theme of the session, the ghost coach goes around individuals during the session and either takes a player out for a minute or two, or even just talks to them as the session's going and gives them direct feedback based on their goals and targets. So it becomes really specialist and really individualised for that player. If you're a player, then how special do you feel that the coach is taking time out the session to speak to you maybe 2 or 3 times through that session, relating to your goals and your targets to help you achieve them, to help you become better. So that creates a great motivational climate as well. And I think for me, it also gives the ghost coach a primary role as well, so that they are there, they're actively part of the journey, and it's best use a resource as well, rather than having that one coach lead, another one picking up the cones and the bibs, that everyone's actually part of the process. And I think that for me, certainly in my experiences, has worked extremely well. And every child or every player that you work with, goes home and they've been given those 1, 2, 3 bits of information relating to their individual targets. I think it's quite a powerful tool and shows the player and the parent that you've got their priorities at heart, that you really want to try to invest in them as people, as footballers, as opposed to just as the team as a whole. This one's an interesting one. It's kind of similar to the ghost coach, and it might depend on the age and stage of your players as well, but a buddy up system. So that's the concept where you might pair up players together and the coach can do that however they see fit. So it might be that you want to try to create and foster better relationships between certain people. So you might want to manufacture that a little bit better, but that's obviously up to you, the skill of the coach, and the environment and the players. Each player, so if I buddy up with someone, I then get to know their IDP plan, and obviously they get to know mine, and we work together for a period of time. So maybe we work together and they're my buddy for that 12 weeks. And the idea behind that is it helps build up a bit of a support network. So it's not just the coach or the parent that's maybe in charge of that, but it's also their teammates. So it becomes a really kind of wraparound system where everyone's bought into the process and everyone understands your plan and what you're trying to achieve. Not only does that help a little bit of vulnerability and create that psychological safety within a team environment, it empowers the players to become almost self-led, self-coached, and learning from each other. And I think we all know as coaches that sometimes we can talk and talk and talk, but all it takes is maybe a teammate to say something and it actually has a real impact on the player. So again, it's just using all the different tools that you've got at your disposal to see how much you can help and motivate those players to become better. And how I see that working in a training session would be that when you're doing the session that you're running, you might then have deliberate breaks in between, and you then say to them, right, okay, I want you to go over and go and speak to your buddy, and I want you to then talk about some of the things that you've seen them do relating to their IDP plan. Or it might be that if you've got a little game going and you've got teams around the side, you might say, right, the guys that are off, I want you to really focus on your buddy here and what they're working on. So say it's left foot, for example. So how many times are they using their left foot? And then after they play their game, they come over and they get a little bit of feedback from their buddy and their partner. So again, there's always that relationship and focus on what's my plan, what am I trying to achieve as an individual, but then also you're getting that peer-led review happening quite a lot. And that hopefully will also encourage leadership, communication, and all those other things that as coaches we're always continually trying to strive our players to be better at and to do. The next one's quite a simple one. So that's just the use of video analysis. And again, I appreciate that maybe not everyone's got access to this sort of equipment or to staff that can do that. Obviously, there's different ways of doing that. There's various ways, whether it be on a phone or a tablet, to film things as well and getting injured players or parents to help film sessions. But the use of video is obviously really useful. It's a fantastic tool to use because players can review their sessions back. They can perhaps clip some of the sections that they've done in a game or training, and they can really use that in relation to their IDP. And it might be that when they come to having those formal feedback meetings again with you as a coach, that they might actually have some clips from games and training to say, well, actually, coach, this is how much I've improved. Look at the difference in game 1 to game 10 on this skill or whatever it may be that they've been trying to work on. So I think that really acts as a good motivational tool for players to use and for coaches to use to challenge the players in. If you don't obviously have access to that, then it might just be that you use role models, so you challenge the players to go and watch some of the top players in in the country, or Champions League games where it's really high level, and you get them to try to note down observations that they see their role models, if you like, those heroes of them that they want to emulate. And it might be then that they notice that, a Kevin De Bruyne scans 3 or 4 times before they receive the ball. Well, if that's the case, can then, as a homework task, if that's something they've observed and that's something that they want to work on as part of their IDP, then can you devise, as a player, can you then create a little training session that's going to help you do that? And that will tie into the next thing that I'm going to speak about in a couple of slides. So again, you're actually, again, empowering the player to come up with them taking a bit of ownership on their development. Yes, as a coach, you can help them with that as well. So again, you can co-create it if you feel it's relevant. But it's all about them trying to really break down what they're seeing their role model doing on the TV, and then actually devising a little training session, a little technical practice that's something that they can practice in their own time, either at home or in the park or whatever it may be. And again, I think that just helps with that motivational climate and making sure that they're striving to be the best that they can be, but really try to focus on those key things that they see, because they'll always pick out the obvious, the goal or that fancy skill to go and beat a player. But if you give them that task of how many times did they use their left foot and right foot, how many times did they scan before they receive, and break that down a little bit more, and then challenge the players to come up with a session, I think that can be quite a good task to do and see what they come up with. Sometimes, in my experiences, they come up with better sessions than I could, which is always nice because then you can steal them and use them at a later date. This one's an important one for me. I think this is one that often gets forgotten about. The role of the parent for me is massive. They're obviously the biggest influence. Again, obviously, age and stage. If you're working with adults, it's maybe less important. But if you're working with children, parents become really, really important in that journey. Rather than keeping parents at arm's length, I think it's vital that you keep them in with you and you share what you're trying to achieve. And through the IDPs, if the players and the parents are involved together from the start and they know what their child's objectives are for the next 12 weeks, then give them a task and say, well, see at training or in games, that all I want you to do is take notes on how many times did your son or daughter use their left foot in the game, for example. Take a little tally mark system. How many were successful, how many were unsuccessful, whatever it may be. And when there's breaks in play or breaks in training, drink breaks, go and get them to run across to their mum and dad and get some of the numbers down. How many did they do in that 20 minutes? And they can run over back to you and say, coach, I got 15 passes or 15 touches with my left foot. And then you challenge them, obviously, for the next 20 minutes to go and see if they can do more. And what that helps do is it helps focus the parents as well as the players on some individual focuses. It also helps detract a little bit from the outcomes, i.e. the results and who scored goals and all that sort of stuff. And it really starts to hone in on the performance outcomes and performance goals. So it's really more concerned about the process rather than obviously the outcomes themselves. So I think for me, in my experiences, that's really helped reshape and reframe parents' views on the game, because they're so consumed with looking at certain aspects of their child's game that they kind of tend to forget a little bit more about what's happening around them in the pitch, and they're more concerned about taking those notes down because they know that their son or daughter's going to ask them questions on it shortly. So that for me is great, and it also then keeps the parent involved in the process. So that drive home after the game, hopefully with a bit of work as well from you guys, is that you can then really reframe those conversations in the car. So rather than did you win and how many goals did you score, it's a bit more of how many times did you use your left foot or how many times did you scan before receiving the ball. And for me, those conversations just tend to be a little bit better for the players' development and how they prioritise their development over a period of time. And then the last one that I wanted to share, the last kind of tool that I think that's good for individual development and training, we spoke about under the role modelling task of devising little homework sessions. Well, it's a great opportunity, I think, that when you're out setting up the session and the kids start to arrive, get them to go and set up their little homework task, get them to practice it. Perhaps you maybe task them and their buddy on the buddy up system that they go and work together on it, and they work in pairs as they arrive. So before we even start the session, they've maybe spent 10 minutes on their kind of homework task, and which is obviously relating to their goals. or as a coach, to show that you really value them as individuals and that you want to develop them as individuals, then you dedicate some time at your training session to do that. And that can be obviously at the start, middle, or end of the session. But what that does is it actually then shows the player, the parents, and the club, obviously, that you're really prioritising individual development as well. And again, it doesn't have to be for a long time. But if it's done over, frequent basis, and it's done often, then that can have a massive impact on a player's development as well. One thing I probably didn't say at the start, and I should have, that it doesn't always have to be things that they're deficient in. It might be something that you want to make it stronger. So if they're really, really excel in a certain area and they want it to be even better, then that's okay. Or it might be something that they find really, really difficult and they really struggle with. And then if that's the case, then obviously they can do that to make sure they get up to a certain level as well. So I think for me that's a really important one. It gives them a bit of ownership, and then as a coach you can float around that as well, and you can start to influence and ask questions and get a bit more from it, and maybe challenge them to come up with different activities pre-training. And I think that just makes the flow of the training a little bit better too, that they're coming in and rather than just kind of carrying on for that first 10 minutes or whatever as you're setting up, that they're actually then spending a bit of time that's more meaningful to them as well, which I think is important. So that's me, guys. Hopefully I've kept that fairly short and sweet, as I promised I would on a Friday afternoon. As you can see, I've got the Twitter handle there. If there is any questions just now, I'm happy to take them. Alternatively, obviously, if you want to reflect a little bit on what we discussed today and ask more kind of deeper questions at a later date, then that's probably the best way to contact me. So thank you for listening. Thank you for your time, and happy to take any questions that you may have.